And now, welcome, and we turn things over to our special guest this evening, Rosie Ginsburg. Welcome, Rosie.
Thank you very much. And I am very happy to be visiting you all in your homes tonight. It's very exciting for me. A guten Abend, first of all, good evening. My name is Rivka Ginsberg, or I was born Rivka. Changed the name after some time, and I will tell you the story of that. I'm here tonight to talk to you about a part of your country's history. I am one of the 2 million Jews from Eastern Europe who arrived on your shores between 1880 and the Great War. Why did we come? Why did we leave our homes, places where our people had lived for centuries? How did we get here? What happened to us when we arrived? How did we manage to live in your strange and wonderful country? What were our lives like? So many questions. I hope to give you a glimpse by telling you about my own family's story. It's not that my family is so important. We're not. But our story is the same as that of so many, maybe even the same as some of you. So a few introductions here. I come from a little village, a shtetl called Gliacovici, which is in the region of Polessi, part of Belarus, which is today in the country of Russia. So I came from a very small village, far, far from your shores. Also, I want to tell you about the ganze Mishpacha, that's my family. There was Shmuel, who's my tate. There's Chava, my mame, Moishi, my brother, and Rivka, that's me. Now I'm going to show you throughout a lot of pictures, but my family, like I said, we're not so important. So the pictures are not of us, they're just of people like us. So what was life like back in the shtetl of Gliacovici? Well, life wasn't always so bad there. We had some hard times, certainly, but we were a very close-knit group. We helped each other out in those hard times, and we were, of course, unified in our religion. We were all Jews together. We were poor, but so was everybody else in Gliacovici. We didn't put a lot of stock in material things. What we prized instead was learning, which for us meant studying the Torah, the sacred book. Of course, that was reserved for boys and men. Here you see some boys learning their Aleph base in their cheder, in their school. And it's a picture of life in the shtetl, and it's also a picture of the shtetl in life. Those of you who are old enough to remember that fine magazine. Sorry, one of my cats wants to take part also. So my tate, Shmuel Ginsburg, immigrated to your country in 1907. He worked for 3 years there in order to send us the money for our passage. For my mother, Chava, my brother Moishe, who was 10 at the time, and I, Rivka, I was 14. We came over in 1910, before the Great War, which was a good thing because that war stopped most of the immigrants like us from coming to your shores. Why? The German submarines, of course. So you might ask, well, Rosie, if the shtetl was so good, why did you leave? Why would a smart man like my tate want to leave our little shtetl of Gliacovici, leaving us, his family, behind? Left behind everything he couldn't carry, his elderly parents, his friends, to set out on this long and dangerous journey to your country? Well, historians, people much smarter than I, have described these as pushing and pulling factors. So, push factors are things pushing us out of Gliacovici. For example, there were verkackte taxes just on us Jews. Only Jews had to pay them, very unfair. There was also the military draft that applied to the young men. The conscription in the army could last for 25 years. And it was so onerous that many young men cut off this finger. Why? Why this one? Because it's the trigger finger. So then they don't have it, they can't serve. And then, of course, there were pogroms. You know what that is? Yiddish for disaster. Not really. The word actually comes from Russian and it means to devastate or destroy. It was a kind of terrorism against us Jews. Kein ein horror. These were very, very bad things to happen. The worst of them, however, had happened already in the 1880s. And we, like many others, did not begin to depart until the early 1900s. So the pogroms, as horrible as they were not the only reason that waves of us left for your shores. The other thing was the pull factors. There were good things happening in your land that pulled us towards you. So many things. We heard there were no pogroms. We would have civil liberties, even for a Yid. Imagine, a Yid could own a business, even vote. We heard that you got paid for everything in America, even for voting. We children could learn to read and write, even the girls. We knew that we would have to work hard in America, but we knew that we could get something for ourselves. Everyone said that you could work for just one day and get enough money to buy many yards of calico, a couple sacks of grain, a tub of butter. Even the poorest people could afford soap and even use it every day. Just look at the picture here. These are the Jews already in America, dressed up all fancy, and they are holding out their hands to us, their sisters and brothers in the old world, in Europe. Yes, we thought that life would be easier in America. We called it the Golden Medina, the Golden Land. We knew all these things about it because some of our fellow people in the shtetl had gone there and came back for a visit. Yitzhak Rosenboim, for example, he had immigrated in 1898. He came for a visit wearing a bowler hat and a fine coat, the kind only the richest goyim can afford to wear. He told us that he buys meat every week. And Nahoma Feldberg, whose uncle went to the Golden Medina last year, got a letter from him with 3 gold pieces in it. She'll be buying her passage ticket soon. And our family did too. We used the money that Tata sent for us, and we also sold all of our goats and many of our belongings in order to pay for our passage. We had a very, very long and difficult journey. It was going to take many, many weeks, and we would have to travel by cart, by train, and by ship. But I don't have time to tell you all about the journey tonight. Just realize it took us many, many hard weeks of traveling, and we finally reached the Golden Medina, America. Now, you always see pictures like this of immigrants on a ship, rejoicing and jubilating over the Statue of Liberty. In our case, at least, this was not true. Emis, we were cheering as we steamed past it, but who knew from that statue? We were just happy to see the land, that's all. For weeks we'd been in transit, on foot, on the cart, on the train, on the ship. We were just glad to be arriving. Our sea voyage was almost at an end. When the barge that carried us from our ship to Ellis Island landed, Mama bent down and kissed the ground. The Golden Medina at last. We had crossed a huge distance, yes, but now I think we had crossed even more time. We had left behind our agricultural country life for an urban, industrialized nation, a place we could not even have imagined back in Gliacovici. But we're not there quite yet. We had to go through medical inspection. I almost would prefer a program. It was so frightening. They unbuttoned our collars to look for lumps, listened to our breathing, examined our teeth. But what they did with our eyes was the most frightening of all. They flipped up our eyelids with a long hook to check for eye disease. In the days before your miracle medications, this eye disease was incurable and very contagious. There were only actually 100 immigrants total ever treated at Ellis Island for this disease, but the health service devoted 80% of its budget to inspection for it. That's because we Eastern European Jews were just associated in their minds with this illness. Now, maybe you're thinking, Rosie, I go to the doctor and I don't get so terrified. Why was this such a problem for your family? You have to understand that we had never been seen or examined by a doctor, and undergoing such probing all over ourselves was excruciating, especially for us women who valued modesty. Anyway, thanks to God, all three of us got through without a mark of blue chalk on our clothes that meant that we would have to have additional inspection. You know, things like pee. What do you think P was for? Well, P meant something's wrong with your lungs. What about H? Well, that's for the heart. And an X, the X meant that you were mashugana or crazy, something wrong up here. Worst of all was LPC, which meant you were likely to become of public charge. Nobody could cure you of that. Or LOPD, which meant lack of physical development, meant you were too skinny and too small. Hard things to treat. So finally, 8 hours after we have gone through the inspection, we are finished and we're permitted to go. Finally, we're going to see Tate. We haven't seen him in 3 years. The entrance hall was very crowded. Where was Tate? When he had left 3 years before, he had worn his beard and his payas, his sideburns long, and usually wore a long overcoat over his prayer shawl or talit. But who was this man waving and shouting, dressed like a gentleman with a Hamburg hat and his payas and beard all shaved off like a guy? No talit, no prayer shawl. Mama was the first to understand that it was him. Looking back, I guess that next to him, we looked like real greeners, real newcomers. And we acted that way too, staring and pointing at all the strange sights. But we couldn't restrain ourselves. There were so many wonders. Finally, after another boat ride, we reached our new neighborhood. So much commotion, oi gewalt, wagons, pushcarts, carriages, horses, so many people pushing, rushing, talking, dawdling, eating, yelling, as many as grains of salt in a dish. And what was this place we were coming to? It was the Lower East Side. In my day, outsiders called it the ghetto. We didn't know what to call it. We had heard that the streets in the Golden Medina were paved with gold. With gold they paved the streets? Paved with horse caca, more like. And the smells, yes, I recognized some familiar smells like cabbage, onions, horse dung. But what was that smoky smell? Not like the smell of the wood that we burned. It was, of course, coal smoke. And of course, I had smelled the manure of horses before, but in our shtetl, only 3 horses lived. Here there were hundreds, all leaving their droppings right there in the street. And where was the sky? Was there really no sky here? Almost shut out by the tall buildings on both sides of the street. And what we could see of it was not blue like back home. Here, it was the color of smoke. Almost everything, every single thing was different from what I was used to. The street was paved with asphalt, not made of packed dirt or cobblestones. People were wearing outlandish clothing. The women are going in their own hair like goyim. There were street lamps, such as we never saw back in Gliacovici. There were immense buildings towering up to the sky with metal gratings on the outside that we later found out called fire escapes. Yes, I knew that people lived here not in Häuser like back home, but they are living in these towering, cramped flats in those immense, tall buildings. Yes, I could see that horses and carriages and wagons were conveying people and things, but everything so big. Yes, I saw men, women, and children, but they're all dressed like the goyim. Only a few women were wearing the sheitel or the wig like married ladies wear, and most of the men had cut off their beards and payas. And so many tongues they spoke. I was astonished to hear languages besides Yiddish and Russian. Later, I would learn to identify some of them: Italian, English, a funny kind of Yiddish called German, Polish, and Chinese. Our new home did have something familiar. On this crowded street, we saw a lady wearing a checkered shawl, such as the ladies all wore back in Gliacovici. We could see that even here, in so much unfamiliarity, there was our landsmen, our people from back home. So we moved into one flat after another, trying to find the best one. And after about 1 year, we moved into 174 Delancey Street, number 34. Just the third floor, not so far to schlep the furniture, groceries, supplies up and down. Looked like the kind of place rich people would live in. A picture on the wall, a small rug on the floor, a front room with a real window with real glass, a small kitchen, and a bedroom. Could all those 3 rooms be for us? Well, no. To pay the rent, us four, we took in 2 boarders, single men who paid us rent, and my mama cooked for them too. One was a learned man. He'd been a rabbi back in Gliacovici. Yes, like many others, we tried to stick close to our landsmen. Can anybody guess what she's doing here holding the baby? She's doing the wash because she's got this hot pot of water boiling. She has some soap and then she beats the clothing here with a paddle to get them clean. And all the water has to be schlepped in and out. A home in the tenement. Of course, Mama did her very best to make the tiny flat a home, more heimish. They were all filthy at first from the coal dust when we first saw them. She would set to heating some water on the stove and then scrub it from bottom to top with hot water and lye soap. It's a question. Did heating all that water with the coal stove create more drag and dirt than she could clean, maybe? And using lye soap, that was a luxury. Back in Gliacovici, she would have used sand. Mama saved a few pennies every week and bought some lace curtains. They didn't stay white for long. How would she save? Well, she would earn a little money by taking in washing at first. And she was the maven of the metzia. What is a metzia? Means a bargain. She would walk an extra 6 blocks to buy meat at a penny less. The fruit she would buy from a stand where it was not piled up nice and neat. If it looked neat and nice, it cost more. Broken eggs, not whole, she would buy. But even though she was a bargain hunter, the bread she bought, the carp, whatever, it was the best quality because she could make those pennies really sing. We have an expression: God could not be everywhere, and therefore he created mothers. And here is a witz for you. A woman is buying stuff and she says, to the peddler, "How much for these cucumbers?" And the pushcart seller says, "2 for 5 cents." The woman says, "How much for just this one?" And the pushcart guy says, 3 cents. And the woman says, "All right, I'll take the other one." So how did we keep our clothes clean? Well, we had to wash them, as you saw already, on the stove, and then we would hang them out the windows, but just like everybody else. And of course, since we're on the 3rd floor, the people on the 4th, 5th, and 6th floor, their clothes are going to be dripping on ours, so it was really hard to get anything dry. And then, of course, it did rain from time to time, and everything would turn gray from the coal dust that was in the air. But you could use those laundry lines to send little messages, like a telephone wire, before there was any telephone. How did we keep ourselves clean? This is a nice picture to show you new, but maybe you're wondering about it. There was one toilet for every 2 apartments. And remember, in our apartment, there are 6 people. This was normal. The toilets are in the hallway. At first, my brother Moishe was afraid to leave the flat at night to make water because the hallway was very dimly lit. Mama had to leave the door open and shout to him to encourage him. "Moishe, it's okay, come back fast." So when he went to the toilet at night, they knew about it even in the flats over on Houston Street. And you see, the newspaper hanging on the wall is not for reading. I will leave you to conclude for yourselves. What about keeping clean our bodies? Well, in the for the bath, we use a tin tub in the kitchen. Everyone in the same water, youngest last. Sometimes it looked like Moishe was cleaner before he took the bath. And look, he gets his underwear washed at the same time. Tata would also go to the Schwitz, which was a public bath. And sometimes, but that was just for men. Mama would also go to the mikvah, which was the ritual bath at the synagogue. So we have this very small space and not a lot of place to put food, to store it. So Moshe and I will sometimes send out to buy food. Very often, actually, because no place to put it. Bread, herrings, cabbage, tea, sugar. Mama could not do it all. Not to no supermarket like you got now, to the push carts. Push carts, just like back in Gliacovici. You could buy sugar so cheap that Mama wouldn't even blink when we took 2, even 3 lumps for our tea. Such bread, such meat, such fish like you never saw back in Gliacovici, where a Jew felt lucky to see a herring on the table once a week. At the market, we saw so many wonders that were new to us, like that strange fruit looked like a yellow cucumber. Moishe bit right into the peeling, first one he got, and spit it right out. Boy, we learned fast you had to peel those bananas. And this ain't no witz. Mama, she sells spaghetti for a bargain over on Mulberry Street. And you know, Mama, she can't pass up a bargain. Now, what do we know from spaghetti, Jews from Gliacovici? Mama, she boiled those spaghetti noodles for must have been an hour and a half until it was just mush, like a pudding, had no flavor. One thing we bought a lot of, and that was bulbis. Now, you can see a picture of what bulbis is over there in the upper left. Let's see how you are doing in Yiddish. I give you a list. Sonntag, Montag, Dienstag, Mittwoch, Donnerstag, Freitag, Shabbos. Can you all guess what I am making a list from? Sonntag, Sunday. Montag, Monday. Dienstag, Tuesday. Mittwoch, middle week, Wednesday, and on like that. So there's a song about bulbous. It's kind of a song to make fun of a difficult situation of not having a lot of money and eating a lot of potatoes. So the song itself is kind of a vits. I don't sing very well, and I hope you will all join in. No one can hear you from the group. You can sing as loud as you like. So sing with me. Sonntag bulbes, Montag bulbes, Dienstag und Mittwoch bulbes, Donnerstag und Freitag bulbes, Shabbos in a novene bulbe kugele, Sonntag weiter bulbes. I know you are all singing. So what does it mean, a kugel? Well, it's like casserole dish with grated potatoes, onions, goose schmaltz or fat, eggs, breadcrumbs. A taste of kugel lifts me to heaven. And the geese were raised right there on Hester Street. Mama would blow between their feathers on the back, and when they were yellow, that meant that the goose was nice and fat and would have lots of schmaltz, fat. So soon after we come to your country, we of course are still observing very carefully Shabbos or Sabbath day. Mama would prepare for it, make a cholent or a casserole dish, set out the candlesticks, bake a challah, all those things. We paid one of Moshe's little Italian friends to act as the Shabbos goy. You know, observant Jews are not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. So the Shabbos goy would do all the things we were not supposed to, like light the lamps and the coal stove, things like that. And we would walk to the temple where the men and the women sat separated, just like at home. But something happened just after we arrived. On our first walk home from shul, I saw something shocking. Tata said that Moshe and me could choose something from a pushcart, one of those new ice cream cones. Anyway, the peddler asked for a nickel, and I thought that Tata had credit with him like back in Gliacovici, because as you may know, Jews do not touch money on Shabbos. But no, my Tata reached in his pocket for the nickel. He would never have done this back home. I almost choked on my ice cream. Was Tata no longer a Yid? Were we going to forget all of the halacha, the Jewish laws for living? Would we start to worship money instead of God, as some of the rabbis back in Gliacovici had prophesied? And then, of course, I had to stop thinking about that because Moshe put the ice cream in his mouth. It's so cold. He drops it and starts screaming. Anyway, little by little, Moshe is the first to become a regular Yankee, an American. We wanted to stop looking like greeners, stop looking like newcomers, fresh off the boat. One way to do that, of course, was to adopt American dress and habits. My brother got teased all the time because of his clunky shoes that had been made by the cobbler back in Gliacovici. They were made several sizes too big, so they would last a long, long time. New shoes cost a lot, and my parents couldn't afford to spend that much. They told him to wear out the ones he had before he could have new American ones. But one day he came home barefoot. He had tossed his shoes onto a rooftop and wouldn't say where. And then Tata had to buy him new ones. And then Moishi, what does he do? He takes up chewing gum. Mama asked him again and again, what's this narishkeit, this foolishness? Spend geld money on something you just chew and you never eat anything. Meshigas. I'll never forget what happened when he asked our Tata to start calling him Mo. But I too started to change. As my brother started to look like a regular Yankee, I did too. I gave away my kerchief and my old clothes, and I bought a beautiful shirtwaist blouse with a skirt in a dark blue print. And I started styling my hair in a pompadour. When I looked in the mirror now, I saw a young American lady. And I have to change my name too. Moishe becomes Mo. Tata, even though he blew up like a firecracker when Moishe asked to be called Mo, he eventually stopped being Shmuel and started to be Sam to the people he knew. As for me, I couldn't go around with a greener name like Rivka. I changed my name to Rose or Rosie. There were lots of Rosies in our neighborhood. The only one who in our family who stayed the same was Mama. She stayed Chava. Now, as you know, some families they changed their surname. A lot of people believe this happened at Ellis Island, and it did, but not so often as you think, because really at Ellis Island, they were just checking off people from the passenger lists, and they didn't have to write the names at all. More often, what happened was is we immigrants changed our names ourselves, sometimes just because we wanted to fit in better. Some Jews did just what they did back in Gliacovici and named themselves after the area they lived in. So the area that we lived in was Delancey and Essex Street, so you had Yitzhak Delancey and Tova Essex. And sometimes it happened when those around them couldn't pronounce or say their names. For example, my friend Annie's last name was Meisel. When she came home with her first report card from school, her name was recorded on it as May. Her tata cried, but they did not make a fuss. They were too scared to go to the school officials, and soon everyone in her family was a May, not a Meisel. So how are we making a living in the new country? Back in Gliacovici, Tata had been a Schneiderer, a tailor. So here in America, he worked as a pants maker. Mama, Moishe, and I worked finishing men's jackets. We worked at our flat, turned the parlor into a workshop by day. We put the sewing machines next to the window for the light and the air. Tata earned $9 a week in the high season, so much geld or money. But what we didn't realize at first was that money would not go as far as it did in Gliacovici. You see, back home, we could grow most of what we ate or barter for it. Here in America, we had to pay out geld for every potato, every chunk of coal, and for the rent. It was a hard job. You think sitting all day for a living is easy? Think again. One night, Mama was so tired from bending over the sewing machine all day, she fell asleep right in a soup bowl with the soup in it too. I want to point out is ketubah on the wall between the windows. It is a kind of a marriage certificate. It details all of the obligations and responsibilities of the groom to his wife. So it's proudly displayed there. Men's fashions. They look so elegant, no? Everyone having fun, looking great. But what it cost us to make these clothings. Oh, Fashmir. Can you imagine that this lifeless stuff could be the cause of so much suffering? Or that Mr. Singer's invention, the sewing machine, could cause so much woe? In the winter, it was cold. We worked from 7:30 to 9 o'clock at night. We were paid by the piece, so the more pieces, the more money. The only light coming from a gas light. In summer, it was sweltering. Not for nothing, they call it a sweatshop. We are all hunched over all this cloth, dust from the cloth, coating everything, our eyeballs even. So where was Mo in all of this, that wilde Haya, that little brat? Being 10 years old, Mo had to go to school. Back in Gliacovici, he would have been in Cheder. Here, it was public school 20 on Rivington Street. Of course, he starts school, doesn't know no English. Yiddish he knew, a little Russian, and could even read some Hebrew from his days in Cheder back in Gliacovici. So you know they put him in with the littlest kids at school so he can learn English. A big boy of 10 with all those little ones. He was so embarrassed when they had to stand up for the, you know, what you call it, for the flag, allegiance pledge. Yes, but he learned fast. He was a smart kid and quickly rose through the grades. What about me, Rosie? Did I go to school? Me, no. I was too old at 14 to have to go to school, and my hands were needed at home for the work. Plus, I was a girl just gonna get married. What did I need with reading and writing? So many of our neighbors could not read or write. Think about that. They could not write letters to the relatives they had left behind, nor read letters that they received. They had to hire a scribe if they wanted to write letters and go to the rabbi or the matchmaker to have something read to them if they received a letter. So Mo is learning to read and write, but in English, not so good in Yiddish. When Mo, when Mama went to a school meeting, Moshe had to go with her to explain what was what. Sure, she knew some English enough to get by when buying carp or cabbage, but the special language of the schoolroom, words about the allegiance pledge, blackboard, honor roll, she doesn't know from those. So Mo, he has to go along to help her out. The children teaching the parents. We had a saying in those times, in America, the children bring up the parents. When a note would come home about Mo getting the ruler for some offense, she had to ask him what it said, and he would just change the words to suit him. I told you he was a wilde hire, a real brat. That stickball game he learns from his friends. My mama couldn't stand it. She would say, playing stickball, Moishi is the king of the loafers. Why would you waste your time and strength disturbing other people, making a racket when you could be learning or earning a living? And many other people felt the same way. Somebody wrote into the newspaper, says, what's the point of this crazy game, this stickball? It makes sense to teach a child to play dominoes or chess, but stickball? The children can get crippled. I want my boy to grow up to be a minch, not a wild American runner. Sometimes Mo comes home with his pants, shirt, shoes, everything covered in horse caca. He would say the caca made sliding into second base easier. Oy vashmir. He learned some bad habits, it's true. Older children played cards and used tobacco and such language. Well, he certainly learned English fast, and it was fortunate Mama did not understand. One of the entertainments everybody enjoyed was the theater. You know, we didn't have any radio and no TV neither. There were 14 Yiddish language theaters back then, most of them over on Second Avenue. I'll never forget my first trip. It was Hamlet by some guy named Shakas Piara. When the time for the ghost came, there was a weird yellow light on the stage. And suddenly a spooky figure appeared, intoning, I am your father's ghost. I was terrified. Besides Shakespeare, we had stories from the Bible, comedies about new life in America, like A Brievala der Kale, which means a letter to the bride. We had tearjerkers about mamas saying goodbye to their children forever, Tolstoy, you name it. The entertainment was inexpensive. It would go on until midnight, and you can buy from your seat your snacks, apples, peanuts, candy, soda pop, all those things. In July of 1912, my tata got naturalized as a citizen of our new country. He was wanting to vote in the presidential election of that year. He was so fond of that Mr. Roosevelt, who had helped to bring about a lot of good reforms in our area. A real Yankee he was. Imagine a Yid with a vote. Who would have thought such a thing was possible back in Gliacovici? Mama, she never got naturalized. She couldn't vote anyway at this time. If you're thinking this flag, Rosie, this flag, it looks very strange. It's because it's the flag that was used in 1912. It has 46 stars because a new state way past New Jersey had just been added. Oklahoma, something like that. And there's Mr. Roosevelt. After working alongside my family for a while, I decided to try out working in a garment factory instead. Instead of men's clothing, my factory, which was called Acme, made waists, what you would call today a blouse. It was up on 23rd Street, a nickel ride on the elevated train. I was about 17 at that time, been here a couple years, felt like I knew something. Most of the workers at Acme were young immigrant women like me, most of them under 20 years old. And this was where I mingled in that melting pot, let me tell you, because many of my fellow workers were Italian girls. We worked from 7:30 in the morning to 9 at night, so about the same as at home. But instead of being paid by the piece, we were paid for the time that we worked. Do you think we got extra wages for working such long hours? No. And in the busy season, we sometimes had to work 7 days a week, even on Shabbos. And these conditions were even something of an improvement before reforms had been made. It was even worse. And Mr. O'Reilly, the floor boss, he was a hard man. Geen een horror zal hij niet uitsmijden. Let no evil eye avoid him. If our streetcar was delayed and we came 5 minutes late, we got a fine of an hour's pay. We got a locker to put our coat in, and he'd charge you a nickel a day for that. We even had to pay for the needles in our sewing machines and the electric power to run it. And working 7 days a week, how could I keep Shabbos? It was a choice to worship or to eat. That really broke my mama's heart. But in America, there was not such respect for keeping Shabbos. Here, the key to respect was dollars. Here, your status was determined not by how observant you were in your religion, but by your clothes, your flat, what you had, your things. We came here. We speak Yiddish, what we call our mama lotion, our mother tongue, and a little Russian too. But I'm talking to you today in English, not too bad. I think you understand me. So maybe you're thinking this Rivka, this Rose, she can speak English all right. Maybe they had lessons for her back in Gliacovici. No way. But let me tell you, it was hard for us, but we all learned it. Mama not so good, but enough to get by. For me, I knew I didn't want to live out my life sewing in the Acme waste factory, dancing around all those fakakta rules and regulations. I'd already learned some English to get by with by looking over Moishe's shoulder at his school books. And I also got some books, free books borrowed from the library. But I needed to learn proper English, to read and write it. And I did that with the Englischer Lehrer, which was a textbook and a dictionary just for us Yiddish speakers. And then when I felt confident enough, I also signed up for night school. These were held in the evenings at some of the public schools. In the daytime, the little ones go. In the evening, us adults. Free! What a country! That's where I learned dictation and transcription, what you call typing today, because I wanted to become a secretary. Wear a nice clean shirtwaist myself, keep my hands clean of all the fabric dust. In the middle of all this, I'm 19 years old, and my mama paid the shadchan, the matchmaker, to find me a husband. But this was America. I wanted romance, such as I had read about and seen in the theater, and the talking pictures by this time. So I refused to marry the grocer's son, the Shadkin's first pick, and I waited. Next one she came up was my Benny Kirschbaum. When the Shadkin came to our flat, Mama praised my talents like you wouldn't believe. And next came our first meeting, the Shidduch. And Benny came, accompanied by the matchmaker, to our flat. Mama borrowed a neighbor's china dishes and cleaned our flat till everything shone. A brisket, stuffed cabbage, gefilte fish, even a sponge cake made with 12 eggs. Well, it all worked out. The Shadkin got paid 10% of my dowry, not a lot of money. We had what you call a college marriage. That meant I worked and he went to college. Well, it's 1920 now. I'm a grown-up lady with a husband and a job. Been here 9, 10 years. But am I really a regular Yankee, a real American lady, not a greener anymore, not a newcomer. Well, something happened that showed me I really was. My cousin Gitl came over. She was about 15, 16 years old, came over with her brother Yankala. First, I got her a job at Acme, the shirtwaist factory I used to work in. But she was just miserable there. So fresh and lively she was, working those long hours was just killing her. But she stayed 9, 10 months. I told you how we would go to the theater. She decided to try out for the theater, and they took her. At first, for the auditions, she tried to hide she was Jewish, but one director encouraged her to use her Yiddish accent and sing that popular song, Second Hand Rose. Second Hand Rose, I'm just a second hand rose from Second Avenue. You know that song, yes? Her brother Yankala was so mortified that his sister would take up such a disreputable job. He told her he would sit in the front row of her first performance with a gun and 2 bullets, one for her and the other for him. But she stood up for herself and he came around. He saw how happy it made her and the guilt she made helped too. Next thing we know, she's in the Follies, Ziegfeld's, and no one could be less green than that. She became a real glamour girl, did all right for herself, lost her accent and her greenhorn clothes. And all of that happened, how? With my help. I guess you could say I'm a real American myself, a regular Yankee. From the old world to the new. So, the cool thing about these stories is that they're all true. They all happened, not to one person. I collected them from a variety of books, and you can see the names of some of them here. If you would like to check them out, they are available in the Chester County Library System. There are museums that you can visit, at least at some point, like the Lower East Side Tenement Museum in New York City. There's a Museum of Jewish Heritage in Philadelphia. There are a variety of different places that you can go see stuff. You can check out movies, and I highly recommend Hester Street. You can watch this free on YouTube. It's about an hour long, and I stole a couple of elements directly from there. This presentation also has a lot of me personally in it. I named myself Rosie Ginsburg, born Rivka. My mother's actual name is Rebecca, which is a form of Rivka. And I worked for Ralph Ginsburg a long time ago, so that's where I got the Ginsburg. I did study Yiddish at the Spertus Institute in Chicago, but my family's immigration story is a lot different from this one. So I would be happy to answer anybody's questions at this point.
Feel free to unmute yourselves now, folks.
Don't be shy. Or I'll make you all sing again. Anybody?
Hi, Jan.
Yes.
This is Cindy. Hi.
Hey, Cindy.
Gwen just wanted me to mention to you that last photograph you had of the 2 young women in 1920 on the street, we have a photograph of Macy that looks almost exactly like that.
This is my aunt from North Carolina, thanks to the miracle of Zoom, joining us, my aunt and uncle. Cindy and Gwen, I am wearing earrings that I got from her and also a necklace. So my Bubba, I never called her Bubba, I called her grandmother, but she's here with us tonight too.
Or she was a flapper.
She was a flapper.
She was a flapper, okay.
Okay.
Anybody else? Don't be shy. Yes, Marlene. Marlene, I think I can't hear you. Marlene, can you repeat it? I can't hear you at all. Sorry. Type it in the chat and
Yes.
and Yeah, type it in the chat and Mark
Type
can
in the
help.
chat, I'll read it for you. Yep.
Anybody else?
There we go.
Oh, okay. Do we have a question in the chat?
Yes, what were some of the differences between now and what we know about the height of immigration through Ellis Island?
Well, people don't come to a central place like Ellis Island as they did back then. It's much more diverse. I mean, people immigrate from all over different places. I mean, they did back then too, but most people came, were channeled through there. So that's one difference. What are the differences now? I mean, there's a lot of things that are similar. I think it might be more difficult now.
I don't know if current immigrants have to pass any kind of health examinations.
Yes. Is it in some, my daughter asked, is it possible that I was inspired by Ruth Bader Ginsburg? No, I don't know about her immigrant story. So I don't know.
Because like, I mean, I just thought, you know, like Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, Jewish.
No, I named myself Ginsburg after my former boss. I had a boss in the 80s whose name was Ralph Ginsburg.
So is it possible that he could have been related to
maybe his name was spelled with a Z and hers was spelled with an S, I think. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is spelled with an S, I think, but it's the same sort of name. Probably means they came from around the same area in the old country in Central. Anybody else?
What is the meaning of shtetl?
I'm sorry?
What is the meaning of shtetl?
The meaning of what? Can you say that again?
What is a shtetl? What is a shtetl? A shtetl is a small Jewish village, somewhat rural.
Thank you.
Sorry,
How
I
many
put in a lot of Yiddish words and hoped that the context would explicate what they meant. Like goyim, I don't think I ever said what goy and goyim meant. But I mean, if we were face to face, I could see your faces and I would see if you weren't following me. And in this case, all I could see was my own face. So I apologize if I said words that nobody knew. Now's the time to ask if you remember what they are.
Jane, how many people came from that area over a period of time?
2 million.
Well,
Well,
and the
2 million.
population of the United States about that time was, do you know what it was by chance?
No.
I'm just trying to see what that 2 million, how it would fit in with the total.
Well, I can tell, I don't know that, Reg, but I can also tell you that the tenements, the flats in the Lower East Side that was the highest population density on Earth at that time.
Wow.
It was incredibly crowded. And I forgot to mention also that I lived in one of those tenements. It wasn't a tenement when I lived in it. Certainly not. And I'm sure right now the rent is probably about $5,000 a month. But I did live in a tenement on East 4th Street. So, and it had a bathroom in the hallway, just like Rosie's, and a shower that was part of the kitchen. So.
And it was a walk up, 4th floor walk up.
Yeah, it was 6th floor walk up.
6th floor walk up.
That's my mama talking. She's in Tennessee.
I've been there.
And she visited me there. I lived in a tenement building. So I lived in the area that I talk about moving to. So that made a lot of difference too. I mean, it was just a real personal kind of thing. And I'm reading, somebody's chatting, Rosetta Jacobs. This story could have been my history. My grandparents came from a shtetl outside of Kiev. My granddad became a tailor. And the language in the home was Yiddish, so as kids wouldn't understand what was being said, I'm still smiling. Okay, great. Yes, I've heard from a lot of people. If I hear, oh, your grandparents immigrated, do you speak Yiddish? And they always say only the bad words because the grandparents or whatever would just use Yiddish as a language to keep the kids from knowing what they were saying, to keep secrets.
And there's a question in the chat, what kinds of discrimination did the Jewish immigrants encounter in the early 1900s?
Okay.
Well, they didn't have, they didn't have a lot to do with the rest of society other than other immigrants. When you talk about melting pot, it was more like a salad. You had the Italians, they might be only a few blocks away, and you would have the kids would certainly be mixing in the school and stuff, but everybody in the Lower East Side was kind of from the same boat and in the same boat. So I don't think there was a whole lot of discrimination unless people tried to leave that area. How difficult was it to find areas where the cultural norms of their former homes existed? Well, like I said, if you came from a tiny shtetl way over in Russia, you would see on the street people dressed in the traditional clothing of your own village. So you could meet people who had come from your village 15 years before or 2 years before, whatever. So you were able to maintain a lot of your food ways and life ways, even though you're in this new country. You established synagogues. You did, of course, run into new foods like bananas, but you could also live. You could buy the right bread, the right cheese, the smoked herring, whatever. You could buy all the stuff that you were used to, even in the new country. There were enough of you to be able to do that.
It's interesting that the use of the foreign language disappears usually by the end of the second generation.
Well, because people they want to not be associated with being newcomers. They want to fit in, and especially the kids. And Reg, what's interesting is if you read about the school experience of young children, the people in the school board would actually deliberately try to divorce the kids from their culture. They wanted them to be speaking English. They didn't want the Italian kids eating pasta and garlic. They wanted them eating American stuff, canned soup or whatever. So it would be a real, what do you call it? We used to say a generation gap in the family, because the kid comes home and says, Mama,
Why do you do it
I want tomato on my bread. I don't want schmaltz on my bread. I don't want the fat, the goose fat on there, or the shav. I want to have tomato like my friend Lorenzo gets at home, or whatever, or like they showed us at school. So you have a real crash with the kids and the parents.
It's interesting how some foods were not popular like that were still served. I remember the Carnegie Deli going there a number of times, and being able to eat with schmaltz and onion and goose liver, which I love.
Absolutely. Okay.
Well, a little question here. I noticed you mentioned the Ziegfeld Follies 1918, and that brought to mind Eddie Cantor, and he was born in this country, but his parents came from immigrated to this country, and also Fanny Bryce, I think, was in the Ziegfeld Follies that year. So
that's who I was basing.
You want to comment on moving from those circumstances and finding a way to success through show business?
That's Fanny Bryce is who I patterned my cousin Gittel after. Because of course Fanny Bryce was famous for singing Secondhand Rose,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
she was also famous for using her Yiddishkeit, using her own natural dialect and accent, and became a famous comedian and singer.
Right.
There's a question in the chat about, I'm sorry.
Somebody says Yiddish is a dying language. It is and it isn't. There is, if you go to, of course, areas of Brooklyn and upstate New York, you'll find lots of people speaking very fluent Yiddish. And they tend to have big families. So there's some move to bring Yiddish back or to keep Yiddish alive.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's a natural tendency to group together that the Jews have had to do for a long period of time due to the outside forces, the pogroms and things like that.
Right.
So it's a question of survival more than anything else. So I can understand that. And also many Jewish families don't want their children to marry outside their religion.
Yes.
So, you know, for good reason.
And I'm having somebody
so
say it's hard to find it. It's hard to find a place to learn Yiddish. There is a Yiddish institute in New York City called YIVO, YIVO, and they have programs in Yiddish language and in Jewish culture in general. It's worth checking into if you're interested in things like that. So.
There's a question further up the chat there. How difficult was it to start a business in the United States, such as a bakery?
How difficult was it to start a business? I have no idea. I mean, there certainly were plenty of them. I know there were a lot of problems with blue laws if you had a bar. But other than that, I mean, there was a lot of demand for food, bakery, for example, any kind of food, because there was a huge population density in the Lower East Side. So I would think it wouldn't be too difficult. I mean, you'd have to be, a lot of times people who ended up with a little grocery or a bakery or something like that would start with a push cart. And as they were successful with that,
right.
they could buy a little storefront and go from there.
Yeah.
Another point is, this is Brian Yaffe. I don't think you can see me here. Is the emigres who came first, largely the German Jews who came right after the Civil War, were well established and were, I don't think it's putting too fine a point on it to say that they were somewhat embarrassed about the Eastern European Jews,
Yeah.
like my grandparents,
Yeah.
and created institutions that were, because they couldn't borrow money from conventional banks, and they were able to start these lending societies, and very much supported by German Jews who wanted to bring the Russian Jews along economically and socially, so that they wouldn't be embarrassed about these greenies, as you called them, which is the expression my family used.
What expression did they use?
Greenies, greenhorns.
Oh, greeners. Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly. There was a name.
no emigres.
Yes, I've given this presentation before, and there are sometimes people in my audience who will talk about how there was prejudice within the Jewish community, like between the Yekes, which was the German Jews, and the Eastern European ones, and they often wouldn't marry. They wouldn't intermarry, and they would each accuse the other of not being real Jews. So even within the Jewish community, and they didn't live together either. The German Jews lived uptown, not on the Lower East Side, more uptown. And in fact, I have a longer version of this presentation where my husband, Benny Kirschbaum, is a Yeke, you know, and his family calls my family Hebrews and we call them, they're not Jews, you know, so there was a dichotomy even then that you're referencing. Yep.
This is Jackie here. I'll tell you, if you go to some small cities, they'll have like 7 or 8 synagogues, each synagogue having only a small congregation because they would be either German or Russian. And it's no different because in the small town where I lived, there would be 20 churches because there were the St. James, St. Mary, St. Andrew, because of where the people came from. Even though they were all Catholic, they would not go to the same church as another Catholic from another part of who immigrated.
Yes. Interesting.
A tendency for people to hang together because they feel comfortable with each other too. This is the thing. One of the things that people don't know, and I was surprised that the German population is the largest population in the country today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's hope that let's hope that they have a different tool to examine one's eyes now. But I know they still do examine the eyes. And as a social worker, I worked with an elderly man who, in coming to the United States, his family of 2 sons and the mother were admitted to the United States. He was turned back because he had a condition in his eye called pink eye.
Really?
Was that the same? Was that something they call the disease that you mentioned earlier?
No,
that they look for.
This was called trachoma, Trachoma, and I'm not. It leaves little pebble-like lesions on the inner part of the eyelid, and it's something that I think people today, it doesn't afflict anybody because it's easily cured with antibiotics, so you never even hear about it. But for some reason, Eastern European Jews, in the minds of the immigration inspectors, were all of them suffering from this eye disease, which was highly contagious, and so they had to check the eyes very carefully. They thought that the Italians carried tuberculosis, and and anybody coming from the West Indies or Africa who was Black, they thought had syphilis. So it was certain diseases were associated with certain groups, but it really had no basis in fact because there were only 100 immigrants ever treated for trachoma at Ellis Island. So they put all this budget into it and scared people to death with those button hooks that they used to flip the eyes open with. It's just one of those things. I don't think they do that today anymore. So
they do health screenings though.
Yes. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm sorry.
The thing to keep in mind is what these people did was every day to them. I mean, that was their world. So we look back on that and say, you know, wow, how difficult it was like that. Well, I don't think perhaps they understood just how difficult it was. They worked hard and, you know, with reason, but I think it was kind of every day. It reminded me of a young person and his wife, I think it was in China. They were married and they lived, their apartment was right next door to the factory. I mean, wall to wall. And they were off one day a week and they worked something like 16 hours a day. And that was just their normal way.
Yes. Well, thank you all very much for coming. And
thanks, Jen.
You can watch this
Thank
3
you.
or 4 times. Okay.
Great.
Did very well.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for
Thank you.
tuning in.
Bye, Jan.
Bye. Thank
Good
you.
night. Bye.
Bye.